Hey, it's Mark from Power BI at Work. Thank you for joining another video. We've worked through the steps of Calculate in previous videos. I'm going to bring it up here and just refresh us on the prior videos on Calculate. This topic on this video is specifically going to be on expanded tables in the model, or that concept at least of working with table expansion in our Power BI model. And I just want to make a quick distinction before we get rolling too far. What I'm going to be talking about is distinguishing canvas filters that come from the original filters or labels that are placed on our report visual on our canvas from what I'm going to call calculate filters. And all of those calculate filters we've talked a lot about happen in step 2 through 5. And all of these calculate filters are basically table expressions or calculate modifiers that alter the filter's behavior. So I just wanted to point that out. We've got canvas filters here, and then we've got what I'm going to be calling calculate filters that occur up here. From 3, 4, and 5, you'll remember that these are explicitly done by us as developers within Calculate. All right, well, with that, I'm going to go to an Excel spreadsheet and just review a little bit about how I walk through filter context with new students. So when we're learning filter context, I like to teach it from the perspective of just these canvas filters. And what we do is we take a visual, here I'll go back to a visual, and ask ourselves, what is the current filter context? And so what I'll say is, if we wanted to evaluate for this cell right here, we would say that the current filter context is customer name is Tony, product vendor is Huffy, product description is a bike, and the color is yellow. Now let's take that back to our Excel view and let's look at our model back here. You can see that I've got this model replicated in Excel, and what I would point out to my students is those canvas filters that came from the canvas are being filtered through our dimension tables. So you can see Tony and Hannah are filtered here through customer. I've got Huffy yellow or red. That filters down to one row in product, and then we're filtering over the state of Oregon. We have these keys here, this one to many key here that propagates those surviving rows down through into our sales table. And you can see the combination or the logical and of all three of these filters coming from these dimension tables leaves only one row available for my expression of total sales, and I get $200. All right, well, what does this mean in terms of filter context? Well, it means that we've only used canvas filters over this model. This is, again, the elementary way of describing filter context is to pretend that like our filters can only come from our Power BI visuals. But when we introduce Calculate or more complex models, we know we have the opportunity to add in Calculate modifiers and a variety of different types of developer added filters. Well, when we do that, it's more appropriate to view our filtering over our model through this concept called expanded tables. When we talk about expanded table, it is a concept that helps us remember or visualize the behavior of filters between our dimension table and our fact table, given the complexity of adding calculate modifiers, additional filters in calculate, and even complex models. And what expanded table would say is if you've got a one side to your dimension table, you've got table expansion, because that's the requirement. you've got a one-sided unique key here in this table, expansion happens in the tables that the relationships reach out to. If you have a one-to-many relationship, expansion happens. If you have a one-to-one relationship, expansion happens in both ways, even though that's probably not realistic, but that's what happens. But here we've got 3 dimensions that have a one side. Since I'm an Excel person and I'm coming from Excel, the way that I like to view this is if I was in Excel, which we are here, but if you can imagine that we had our fact table here and we were building a pivot table and we needed values from other tables in our Excel spreadsheet, what we would do in Excel is do calculated columns that would look up or use VLOOKUPs to those other tables to be able to bring them into this single table. That's how I view table expansion. So when I look up here and see the one side, I see the unique key there, which represents the one side. I know I have the ability to do a direct match lookup between my fact table that has repeating rows and values like customer and product. But I can do lookups up here and confidently pull in direct matches for all of my dimension tables right there. So that's how I view it, at least how expanded tables gets established. But let's move on and look at some examples of why we need this concept. If we were to add a calculate modifier to our calculate, so we're going beyond just canvas filters. Now we're talking about calculate modifiers and calculate filters. If we were to add a remove filter over our customer table up here, we might still have those original filters coming from our canvas up here. And so I like to keep these filters lit because these filters are on my canvas and I can see with my eyes on the visual on the canvas that I have Tony and Hannah filtered. Yet that filter does not reach down into the expanded customer table in my sales table. So if I just imagine that I'm filtered up here, but I've removed those filters down here, I've got no filter down here when it comes to sales or evaluating these surviving sales rows. I still have it on product. I still am filtering vendor and color here and filtering down to surviving rows. And then, of course, I still have my filter down to Oregon. But when I remove the filter, I've gone from what was $200 because I play expanded table Tetris here and see that I have aligning filters with customer, part, and branch for only one row. But when I remove the filters over my customer, I get an additional row that survives. If I omit or ignore and remove, I have now 2 rows that survive my applicable filter in sales, and now my total goes from 200 to 600. Let's add one more modifier. Let's add all except. And this is a good example because this is more complex in that I've removed filters over my entire part table, except for the column of vendor. And when I do that through expanded table, I still have the original filter lit up here. But what I've done through the calculate modifier is I've cleared all of the filters over my part table except for vendor. And when I do that, you can see now I have more than 1 or 2 rows. I have 4 rows that survive, and that total is now 775. But it's all because I'm separating what I'm calling canvas filters up here that still remain in the original filter context from calculate filters that have the chance to modify or change our filtered result in our sales table. All right, now we're going to move on to some application of expanded table in our model and in our resulting report. And it's looking at this exercise here where I want to be able to count customers that have made purchase. And this is only for education, but let's say that we didn't want to just count the customers from our sales table. Maybe it's 100 million rows. Maybe we've got a ton of customers and we know that a distinct count over this column is going to be expensive. Are there alternate ways of counting customer as they apply to sales? Well, with expanded table, there are. But let's start out with just the straightforward distinct count over sales. We see that if we write a measure that says distinct count of customer number in our sales table, we can count with our eyes and see we have 4 customers, 101, 102, 103, and 104. And so we, of course, know that we're looking for 4 customers. If we try an alternate way of getting to the same result and we go and count the rows in the customer table, well, this is not filtered in any way. There's no table above the customer table filtering it. And of course, all the rows in our customer evaluate to 5 customers. I know in our customer table, we have through customer 105 there. Now, when I started getting confident and learning calculate and table expressions, I thought, well, maybe one way of doing this would be to do a calculate, count the rows in my customer table, which we just saw were 5, but why don't I add a table expression that goes and gets those physical values of customer number from the sales table? This should return a unique list of customer numbers as they apply to sales. I should get the 4 customers right there. And my expectation was, or my hope at least, was that it would be filtering the customer table down to only 4 customers based on the customer numbers in this table. Well, if we think about it for a second, we realize that those columns are in 2 different tables. They are completely different values, even though they look identical to our eyes. Under the covers in Power BI, those 2 columns are encoded differently. They have different lineage. So in Power BI eyes, those are no matches. So I'm not going to be able to filter something in the customer table based on a column in the sales table unless I transfer lineage or do something more complex. But what I can do to illustrate expanded table is I can do this measure here where I count the rows in customer within my calculate and then just reference the entire sales table. Now, I made a distinction between canvas filters and calculate filters right up front. The canvas filters are very straightforward. They follow the relationships. They follow the direction of the relationships. But when it comes to calculate and the complexity of calculate, when we reference a table up here like sales, it provides more than just what we see in the physical table as sales. It includes the expanded version of sales, which means that that sales table not only has those physical columns in our sales table, but it also has all those VLOOKUPs, all those direct match VLOOKUPs associated with it as well, including the customer number or the customer columns that came directly from that customer table. Those do share the same lineage. Those are encoded exactly the same. And because I'm including those expanded customer columns as they appear in the customer table, but from sales, as they apply to sales, of course, I'm only going to have 4 customers listed in this expanded version of sales. And that's why when we hit enter here and we look at the result right there, we get 4. So that's a very simple way of illustrating expanded tables. Now we're going to go on to a slightly more complex version. Um, we're going to look first at a model in Excel that we drew up where we've got sales reps by name and number. We've got a customer table right there with customer number and name, and then those customer sales right there. Well, the issue here in this model, in this report, is that we have salespeople that share reports, or sorry, share customers. And you can see that these reps share these customers as defined by this bridge table. Some people call this a factless fact table because it's got these numbers and it's on a many side, but it really has no business value in terms of aggregation. But it does help us define how these sales reps up here share the customers over here. So we've created this cross-reference table of sorts that has customer number and rep number right there. You can see that customer 101 is shared by these two reps over here, Sarah and Chewy. 102, same reps. And then we go to customer 103 and 104, which are shared by Kevin and Michael. So the objective is that we want to be able to group sales by rep here in our transaction table. We want reps in the rows and we want total sales as our expression. Well, if we follow these relationships, we've got this one-to-many relationship. So if we follow the rules of just canvas filters, we're going to run into an issue here. We've got this table up here that we can put in our visual and filter over our bridge table. We've got that one going down to the many. So that rep table will filter our bridge table. But we're kind of out of luck from here because we can't expect this relationship to go against the grain and filter up to customer here. But if we move from canvas filters to calculate filters, we know that we have the opportunity to access expanded tables or expanded filters. All right. Well, let's go check that out in Power BI. Let's go to shared sales, and we're going to see that we've got a variety of different solutions here. The first measure that we created was total sales, and you can see that if we just depend on the canvas filters that we see here and just write an expression that doesn't have calculate, which would give us the opportunity to modify or add filters, we hit enter, and we have sales results filtered by customer because there was a direct one-to-many relationship between customer and sales, but that's as far as our filtering goes. When we introduce the rep, we lose that filter. So if we rolled this up to see it better, with that measure right there, there would be no filter over our reps. But let's access some expanded table within calculate. And I'm going to take total sales away so we can see just the filtered results. You can see that all of these solutions produce the same result. So we've got 3 solutions that leverage expanded table. The first one is a table solution. We've already seen it where we're able to, within a calculate, reference our expression of total sales, and then we just reference that bridge table directly. If we go back to our model and we look at that model, we know that when we look up here and see the 1, that's the opportunity for the direct VLOOKUP, direct match lookup. So we know that these columns are coming into this bridge table as filtered through the rep table. I'm going to say that another way. We've got a filter coming from the one side to the many side for the rep. We've got the reps in the rows in our visual. We know that the bridge table is filtered down to just the appropriate reps. in that visual, row by row in the visual. Well, because we've written a calculate in our measure and we've referenced this entire table, we also know that we have VLOOKUPs or direct matches coming in this table from the customer table. Because I'm referencing the entire bridge table, including expanded columns, I know that these are going to become part of the filter. Those expanded columns are part of the filter. They light up as valid filters. And because the encoding or the lineage is coming directly from the customer table, we know that those corresponding columns and values over here are also being lit up as valid filters. And from here, our propagation continues. We can see that we're wide open for propagating a filter between customer and our sales table. And that's why when we go back to this measure here for the table solution, that is a DAX solution that gives us access to those columns in customer, but through the expanded bridge table. The next one is summarize. And this is a table function that I've added to calculate, but it accesses the customer number field from our customer table here. But the important part of summarize here is that I didn't use the customer table as my base table. I used the bridge table as my base table. And because I'm using this as my base table, I'm accessing the customer number field as it applies in my bridge table. So again, I'm lighting up the filtered customers in that bridge table and then mirroring that filter in my sales table, regardless of the direction of the physical relationship. My last example is a relationship solution. The prior two were DAX solutions, but the relationship one, and it's I'm never going to say that this is absolutely the best all the time, but I will say that it is probably ideal in terms of performance. But in this case, we went away from leveraging the expanded table, and we have used a modifier, a calculate modifier cross filter, and we've just, for the moment in this measure, changed the flow of the relationship into a bidirectional filter. And so we can come back here and imagine we turn the arrow on going this way now. And when we turn that arrow on, we have a direct path all the way through into sales. All right, we made it. That was a lot on expanded table. Hopefully that helps in demystifying concepts in DAX and in Power BI modeling that largely go unseen. If you have any questions or comments on how you view topics like this, I'd love to see them in the comments. Please also like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.